Okay. Very good day to everyone. I hope you are all keeping well. This week's double Parsha in Nitzavim Vayelech really is I don't know how to put it. It's the most fearsome of all the Parshas in the Torah, in the sense that it states explicitly the problems that will face us before the advent of the redemption and before the better times come. In a sense, it is even more difficult than the Parsha of Kitavo that we heard last week, which contained the Tochacha and contained all of the details that we unfortunately have lived through of the destruction of the Jewish people. And now the Torah says, "Atem nitzovim hayom kulchem," that you all survived that. Not every Jew survived it, but the Jewish people as a whole, as a national entity, you've survived it. Not only you've survived it, you've rebuilt yourself. To a certain extent, you are stronger than you have been in previous times. B'shavta, and you're going to come home again. You'll return. You'll come back to the land of Israel. You'll build a state. And there will be also a spiritual revival. 70, 80, 100 years ago, everyone thought that religious Jewry was doomed. Certainly not here in Israel did it have a chance. I always mention that in Ben-Gurion's memoirs, he writes that he told the head of the leftist, almost communist party, Mapam, who complained over the fact that somehow he made some compromises with the religious parties at the foundation of the state. So Ben-Gurion said to him, "Chakei odor, just wait, have patience, they're disappearing. It'll all go away." And that was the opinion of many of the experts. The experts always know better, but they very rarely know anything. And so Vishavta, you have returned, right? So they're here also. There are more religious Jews than ever, and more Torah study. They wield, for good or for better, political leverage and influence. And then the Torah says, but then you'll be stricken once more. Voyosi kreeno tzoros rabos v'roos. Great problems will arise again. Roos is bad things will happen. Whatever we can say about this coronavirus, it's a very bad thing. It has disrupted our lives completely. So when that happens, what will the reaction? So again, We already did tshuva. We already tried to improve. It's already better than it was. But now there is what we lovingly call gal sheni, second wave of troubles. So then why? What causes this? What is our reaction? So the pasuk says it's an enigmatic pasuk. It doesn't explain itself easily. V'amarta, so you will say, Ki ein Eloha b'kirbi, because the Lord is not in my midst. Mitzauni oro soele. That's why all of these bad things happen to me. What does that mean? Ki ein Eloha b'kirbi, that the Lord is not in my midst. How do we understand that? So there are a number of different ways, all of which we see in front of our eyes to be an accurate interpretation of the words of the Torah. The Torah is really the commentator on current events in our human existence. So one interpretation is, simply put, the Lord is not in our midst. And take a look at a large percentage of the Jewish people here in the land of Israel, and certainly in the diaspora and in the United States, that have no connection to Judaism whatsoever. They're simply not only they're not observant, they're not Jewish. They have no connection. All the statistics show that the majority of Jews in the United States are unaffiliated. They don't belong to any group. And a large percentage of those who belong, let's say, to Reform and even to Conservative are not even Jewish. So, Ki ein Eloha b'kirbi, the Lord is, there's no Judaism within the Jewish people. Here, no Jew who defines himself as a siloni feels obligated to do any mitzvahs, feels obligated to be Jewish. He got the great excuse, he's a siloni, as though that somehow acquits him. As though somehow he doesn't have to do anything about anything. So that's a fearsome situation. And therefore, mitzauni oro soele. Therefore, all of these problems exist here because you don't want to be Jewish. You don't want the burdens and blessings of being Jewish. Now, it's hard to judge. You can't judge people individually. Certainly, it's not given over to one human being to judge another human being. However, I give you an example. I know a very fine young man who helps me. comes from a very fine religious family. I don't know what happened, but something happened. And he and his family uh, basically have nothing to do with each other any longer. And he has a great deal of frustration and anger, which is quite understandable. And therefore, he took off the kippah. And the moment he took off the kippah, he took off everything, everything. Even though he had studied in a yeshiva for 10 years and he knows, but completely nothing. And if one asks him, I understand that, let's say you have legitimate complaints against your family, against your parents, against your teachers. I don't know who, against whom. But what does that got to do with your relationship to God or with Judaism or the Jewish people? His answer is, I'm a siloni. If you're a siloni, you're freed from everything. You don't have to do anything. Not only that, it's an insult to bring up any matter for discussion, because then you're impinging upon his or her personal choices in life. So it's not a question of mitzvahs and averos. It's not a question of right or wrong. It's simply, it's like you find that in politics, in the United States for sure, but even here, right? If I'm for this party, then there's nothing to talk about, right? Because that's who I am. And so people miss the entire big picture of their lives. And because of labels, I think more than anything else, they somehow justify behavior that they intrinsically know is wrong and doesn't lead anywhere. But to say that I'm a secular Jew doesn't do anything for anybody. It doesn't do anything for the secular Jew. And all of the events of the past 2 centuries in Jewish life testify to that fact. So that's what the Pasuk says. Halo ki ein Elohai b'kirbi. I'm a secular Jew. If you're a secular Jew, mitzauni oro so'ele. There's a second interpretation, which is even harsher. And I've mentioned it before. There was a Jew that wrote a column every Friday in the Yediot. I forget his name. His first name was Moshe. Anyway, and he wrote a column called Parsha Upirsha, the Parsha and its explanation. And he wrote the Parsha, he wrote the general things that would be acceptable to the general audience for which he was writing. But here in the Parsha of Vayelech, he mentions an idea which the Malbim, Meir Leibish Malbim, discusses in his great commentary to the Torah. Alo ki ein Eloha b'kirbi, he says, not like the first shot that I'm not religious enough. I didn't do enough. There's Alo ki ein Eloha b'kirbi. You know, I really is not as meticulous in the observance of mitzvahs as I should be. And because of that, therefore, I pay a price. But there's another interpretation that he says, Alo ki ein Eloha b'kirbi, there is no God, which is the ultimate denial. Simply that there is no God. Now, it's been proven over and over again that atheism is no less a religion than any other religion. But the ability of people simply to say there is no God and therefore I'm free from every obligation. So when Jews say that, and Jews who are the chosen people, who are God's people on earth, who are the Am HaNivchor, who are the Mamlechas Kohanim V'Goy Kodosh, who are the Zgula Mikol Amim. When Jews say that, so then Mitzauni Oro Soele, then disaster always follows. Always follows. And the great Rebbe Barditchev once said, a Jew can be for God, a Jew can be against God, but no Jew can be without God. And that's the struggle. And since Jews are stubborn, it's one of our national traits. So once we decide or we made up our mind that, so to speak, we're going to do it without God, so it's very hard to come back, very hard to turn it around. So then, V'shov Hashem Elokecha, the Ribono Shalom has to turn us around. When the Ribono Shalom turns us around, it's not without pain. If we do tshuva on our own, it is painless. It may be psychologically difficult. It may entail a change in behavior and lifestyle. But we're doing it voluntarily. Anything a person does voluntarily, he can find a way to do it that'll be satisfying and painless. However, V'shov Hashem Elokecha, if the Ribono Shalom turns us around, then it's hard. That's why we say, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha V'no Shuva. Should just say, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha. Chadei Shameinu Kegedem. What does V'no Shuva mean? We don't, God, even if you turn us around, V'no Shuva, let us also turn around. So then it'll be much easier, much simpler, much less painful. It will be a journey of love and of hope, of mission, of accomplishment, not one out of dread and fear. So those are two ways of looking at that pasuk. There's a third way of looking at the pasuk. Alo ki ein Eloha b'kirbi. Moshe is talking about the generation that is observant. People do the mitzvahs. People talk the talk. But in their hearts, God does not appear. I mean, there is a known phenomenon that people on the outside can observe everything and be empty on the inside. Absolutely have no faith, no understanding, no perspective, nothing. It's just following a certain society. When this coronavirus began in March, when I was in the United States, a certain rabbi, very well-known American rabbi, happens to be an Orthodox rabbi, wrote an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal in which he maintained that God had nothing to do with the coronavirus. That, so to speak, God had set up nature, and the coronavirus is part of nature. It's a natural event. It has nothing to do with God, and that therefore searching for godly solutions, so to speak, is not only a waste of time, but it is theologically not defensible. And it was a long article, and I'm sure the article had an impression. And I'm sure the man who wrote it really believed it. But I don't agree. And I think that perhaps now, 6 months later, when things are even worse, it's hard to say that God has nothing to do with it. That somehow this is not a visitation upon human society of a form of warning and retribution regarding human behavior and the abandonment of all moral values. Now we see in the Torah Sodom and Amorah are destroyed. The Torah does not really describe how it happened. A fire came from heaven and destroyed the cities. I don't know what the fire was. I don't know what kind of plague it was. But it destroyed the city, and Avram Avinu was well aware that it was for a reason. It wasn't simply a natural event that somehow was built into nature at the moment of creation. It could have been programmed by God, but however we'll look at it, but we certainly will understand that it was in retribution an example for the behavior of Sodom and Amorah. And that's why, for instance, the Torah said that no one was allowed to turn around and look. Anyone that was saved, Lot's wife, etc., because they also were meant for destruction. They also were worthy of the same punishment. But they were not punished because of the schus of Avraham Avinu. But they should learn a lesson from it. It's hard to teach people lessons. We see that from the daughters of Lot immediately, who commit immoral acts because of the fact that they think they know better how to preserve the world. You cannot preserve the world through immorality. You cannot justify immorality, no matter what the exigencies of the situation may be. So you don't think that God is present. Now, in Jewish life, God is meant to be present all the time. That, so to speak, is whom we are dealing with day in and day out. I was mentioned that Rabbi Rosenberg always used to say, and what does God have to say about this? That's how a Jew thought. He had a certain choice, certain options, even certain temptations. Before doing anything, one should ask oneself, what does God say about this? But alo ki ein Eloha b'kirbi. God is not in, he doesn't factor into my equation. It's all a natural world. That being the case, so then unfortunately, the worst situation is to absorb punishment and not learn anything from it, not understand why it happened, not draw any conclusions from it, simply to ignore it as though it's supposed to happen. And that is the attitude of much of the world today. And unfortunately, much of the Jewish world today as well. You don't hear anyone talking about God. We talk about all of the things that we can do to alleviate the situation, and we're not certain that anything that we can do really helps. But we talk that way. But if we had a prophet that would stand up and tell us, Vishavto ad Hashem Elokecha, again, so maybe that would help. Maybe that would be the key to alleviating the situation, to bringing about a better understanding. So we are going to enter now into the Yom Noroim. There's never been such a Yom Noroim, I think, in our memory. We don't know if we're going to be able to have minyonim. We don't know anything. But we do know that we have to have Eloha b'kirbi. We have to be better people. We have to eliminate the idea that God somehow does not care or exist. We have to understand that no matter how observant we are, still is an attitude of godliness that we have to assume. And it is fruitless for us to look to political leaders or other types such as those, that they should somehow provide the solution for us. And that is really what the Parsha is all about. Very, very direct and clear statement as to what the problems with human beings are and how we should attempt to overcome them. Not easy, but it's very necessary. And therefore, I pointed out, I think, in the blog that I wrote, that Tzovim Vayelech leads always to Vizos HaBrocha. It leads to Hazinut, that we should listen and internalize the message, but eventually it leads to Zos HaBrocha, the blessing and the goodness. And it will therefore lead us to a better year, a good year, a year that we will be able to be better people, and that the Lord will have mercy upon us and remove this scourge and all troubles from us and all of Israel and all of the world. And we will be privileged to have a ksiva v'chasima tova lanu l'chol Yisrael. Amen. Be well, my dear friends, and a very good Shabbos. Thank you.